Welcome to our special customer webinar. Today, Nicholas Whitaker, Training and Development Manager for Google News Lab, will present a Google News Initiative Fundamentals crash course specifically for BLOX CMS users. In the room, we also have Christine Masters, Director of Product Management for townnews.com, Aaron Gillette, Director of Marketing, and I'm Cherry Wolf, Marketing Specialist. The presentation will take about an hour today.
Hello. So I just wanted to give a really quick intro, thank you, Terry, to how this webinar came about. I think many people will have seen the news in recent months that Google has contributed more than $300 million to various causes to essentially help local media and try to encourage open and transparent and training throughout the local media industry. As part of that, News Lab has done much more training and outreach into the field of local journalism, and through our close partnership with Google on several different things. One of the things that we wanted to try to make available was kind of this idea that through our news partnership with Google, we might be able to make some of these training sessions available to our partners in the field. So we're really hoping that with our large scope of customers across the United States, that we're able to kind of help make some of these training and important services that Google is very nicely offering available to our news media partners in the field. So we're really happy to hopefully set this up, and we're looking for some great things in the future on this topic as well. So I'll send that over to Nick, and thank you very much.
Hey, thank you. My name is Nicholas Whitaker. As mentioned, I'm the Training and Development Manager on a team called the News Lab, which is part of a larger initiative called the Google News Initiative. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a minute, but I just wanted to let everyone know that our contact information is at newslabsupport@google.com. So if you have any questions about the webinar or anything that's covered, you can definitely reach out to us there. Also, if you are working on a project or if you get stuck, that is a real email address that goes out to real people. So we do want to hear from you, so don't be shy. Also, we have a ton of resources and other material, which I'm going to share throughout the webinar, including URLs and links and references to other pieces that folks have created using some of our tools. I'm going to send a PDF out to the organizers of this event, so that if you missed anything, instead of having to watch it over and over and over again, which you should, but just not to get all the URLs, I'll have that available to you. Also, just wanted to mention I'm on social media, on Twitter and Instagram and elsewhere, LinkedIn. You can find me at Nick Digital on Twitter, so definitely reach out if you're ever working on a project and you created something cool and you want us to share it. Send it to either that email address at newslabsupport@google.com or to my Twitter account at Nick Digital, and we'll retweet that. We have about 75,000 plus people following us on our Google News Initiative Twitter account, so never hurts to get a little bit of extra publicity there. But it also provides a really good resource for us to show the great work that other people are doing and give people some breadcrumbs to follow when they're working on their own projects. So with that, I'll move through some of the slides here. I wanted to also just mention we have a really good recap video on YouTube, on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Google News Initiative. It doesn't play very well on GoToMeeting, so I'm not going to bother to play it here, but definitely worth checking out. It's about 3.5 minutes, and it'll give you a really good overview of kind of why Google is approaching news in the way that we have been over the last several years. As folks mentioned earlier, the Google News Initiative is a recent initiative that was launched back in March of this year, but it's really a culmination of the work that Google has been doing in the news space for going on about 15 years now. I've actually been working at Google myself since 2010, working to teach journalists in newsrooms and broadcast outlets, educators and universities, at conferences and conventions all over the world, on best practices on how to use Google tools. And that's essentially what we're going to be talking about today. Now, I usually get the question right off the bat, why does Google care about news? And what is Google doing, teaching about tools for journalists? And I think that really, for me, goes right back to one of our core missions, which is to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. And that's very much the same work that journalists have been doing long before Google ever existed. but obviously we're in a unique and challenging moment right now for quality journalism. It's becoming more and more difficult for regular consumers and users to be able to discern between accurate information and false information. Ad revenue is becoming a really difficult model for funding news going forward. So, finding other ways to create revenue is important. It's also challenging for news organizations to keep pace with, basic technological innovation. And that's something that I focus a lot of my energy on, thinking about what tools are available, how we can lower the barrier of entry, how we can provide training and research and other educational opportunities for folks that might be interested in taking advantage of those tools. And that really kind of goes across the 3 core efforts of the Google News Initiative, which we like to call the 3 E's, which is elevate and strengthen quality journalism, evolve business models to drive sustainable growth, and empower news organizations through technological innovation. You can find out more about the Google News Initiative itself, the various different projects that we're working on. You can read case studies and get a lot more information about the other programs that we have available at g.co/news-initiative. And if you haven't already, I definitely recommend follow us on Twitter at Google News Init, shortened for Google News Initiative. But we post quite a bit of new information on there on a regular basis, including updates to products, information about opportunities for other training, and so on. So it's definitely worth checking out. Now, part of the Google News Initiative is one team among many. There's hundreds of people across Google that are working as part of the Google News Initiative and really focusing their efforts on how to help the news industry. Google News Initiative is just, the Google News Lab is just one part of that. And we're really a team that works with journalists and entrepreneurs to drive that innovation in the news industry. And that takes many, many forms. But the 4 topics that we're really focusing on currently are these bigger kind of large buckets that I think everyone would agree are big concerns and rooms for improvement within the news industry. Trust and misinformation, often called fake news, which I think is actually a terrible way of approaching that issue. It's not fake news, it's a very complicated problem, including misinformation, disinformation, propaganda, and also just poorly made journalism. So working around best practices and techniques and ways to prevent your own work from falling prey to fake news, and also how does one create content in a way that evokes trustworthiness. And we'll talk a little bit about that. Local news is a big focus as well. I spend the majority of my time skipping back and forth across the country to various different local news markets throughout the United States. And we work on a variety of different programs, which I'll mention in a minute, including the Society of Professional Journalists training program, and a new one that we launched with Report for America, putting recent graduates and professionals into what we are calling news deserts, or regions where news has consolidated or otherwise dried up for lack of funding. So really to help lift up some of those underrepresented stories, which also fits into our inclusive journalism efforts as well. I have a program that I'm working with the Maynard 200 right now to develop leadership skills throughout underrepresented communities. And then emerging technologies, taking a look at things like drones or AI, machine learning. How do you take advantage of these tools in such a way that makes your job easier and saves you time? Now, we do training in person. We also do training online through webinars like this one. We have about 52 different countries covered with various different editorial partnerships. And we have a News Lab staff in a variety of different regions. I'm right there in the middle of the United States in Boulder, Colorado. So neither in New York or California, as often I'm mistaken for, but in Boulder, which I like to say is halfway in between. We also have these training networks, like the one I mentioned with the Society of Professional Journalists. And the reason I mention these is we can't be everywhere all of the time, but we do have really good partnerships with some very skilled journalists and educators around the world, including the Society of Professional Journalists here in the United States, who, since launching this particular program, we've trained over 16,000 journalists across all 48 contiguous US states. And we're actually trying to match that again this year. So if you're interested in learning more about that, you can go to spj.org/Google, and you can get free training available both in English and Spanish for your newsroom or for your organization. And again, that's spj.org/Google, and those trainings are completely free. If you are not available to have an in-person training, or maybe you're just looking for skills on the go, g.co/news training is another fantastic resource to check out. This has a whole list of various different courses and lessons, much of which we're going to be covering today is under what's called the Fundamentals course, which is one that I would definitely recommend checking out. It'll provide you like a really basic grounding of all the various different tools you might want to be thinking about on a day-to-day basis, and provide you some breadcrumbs to follow for deeper learning on topics like data journalism or safety and security, verification and fact checking, and so on. And I just mentioned as well that we're in the process of rebooting this website within the next couple of months. Currently, it's available. There's 55 lessons in 12 languages. We're actually expanding that to 19 languages and adding even more content, including a sign-in and badging system, so you can track your progress over time. You can get recommendations for courses that might be really good for you and the type of work that you're doing. And eventually we're working towards some sort of a lightweight certification model as well, which we'll have more information on soon. Again, g.co/news training is that website. You can also check us out on Medium at Google-News-Lab. A lot of our courses and training material we put up on there first to get feedback and input from people. And then we'll also host webinars on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Google News Initiative, similar to what we're doing today, as well as on our Twitter account at Google News Lab, or I'm sorry, at Google News Init is the actual correct link there. But again, there's lots of different ways to get in touch with us. This is what we're going to be covering today. It's obviously an enormous amount of information. We always really kind of started off with the basics, so the advanced search and image search. We'll talk a little bit about some tools that you might not know about, like Public Data Explorer. We'll touch on Google Scholar. Your colleagues are actually going to talk a little bit about how to take some of these elements and embed them right into your BLOX CMS. Then we'll also talk a little bit about Google Trends, which is really harnessing the power of Google data, how to visualize that data using various different free tools that Google has made available. Take a look at Google Maps and Google Earth. As I like to say, all news happens someplace, so almost every story can benefit from a map or a locator in some fashion or another. We'll talk a little bit about that. We'll also cover a couple new tools that might be relevant for you as you're thinking about covering the midterm elections, which are coming up. There's a tool called the Election Data Bot, which we'll take a look at, which gives you a real good fire hose of information that's useful for covering those types of stories. And then we'll talk a little bit about verification and fact-checking tips, and then we'll provide some resources and links to additional lessons afterwards. And then we'll have a little bit of time at the end for Q&A. So as you have questions, just write them down. We'll have some time to kind of triage those towards the end. And if for any reason we run out of time and can't get to all of those, we'll have an opportunity to follow up afterwards to answer some of those questions. So don't be afraid to send off your questions that might pop up during the presentation. So let's get started. So I typically get into this by talking about advanced search and Google search. And I think in general, when I am in a newsroom and I take a quick show of hands, I ask folks, who here is an expert at Google search? Pretty much everybody raises their hand. And then once we actually start getting into it, people realize very quickly that that isn't actually the case at all. In fact, most people are always able to learn more about these tools. In fact, this is something that I'm consistently learning new things about myself. We're going to go over some basics here, and then we'll kind of go deeper and deeper into this. But as a reminder, some of you may not be familiar with this, but some of you that might be familiar with it, these tips may not have been using them very much. We all get a little bit lazy and just kind of slam in a paragraph or a small essay into the search bar and cross our fingers and hope for the best, but that's not always the case, or the best strategy. In a perfect world, if you search for something online, Google search would understand exactly what you mean and give you back exactly what you want. But in many cases, that's not the way that it works. So you have to tell Google really what it is that you're looking for. So for example, if I was searching for a Jaguar and I wanted to know how fast it was, well, am I talking about the car or am I talking about the cat? Well, obviously I'm talking about the cat because the cats rule the internet. So I'm going to go Jaguar speed minus car. It's going to eliminate any other examples that reference the car and just leave me examples of the cat. Similarly, if I just wanted to find information on Kim Jong-un on the site CNN.com, I could go site:CNN.com and then whatever the search query is that I'm looking for, and it'll find that for me instead of having to go page by page or manually look for it or use what's often not a particularly great search experience within that particular website. I often reference government websites, for example. Like if you're just looking for that one document on a government website, Kim Jong-un site:/.gov. Maybe I don't know which website it is. Maybe it's the US Census Bureau. Maybe it's another site that I'm not aware of yet. You can look across an entire domain or just a specific website for a search query. And again, this just saves you time. Similarly, if I wanted to find other websites that are similar to, but not exactly like the website that I was just looking at, I can go related:/time.com and get an idea, for example, of what other websites are similar to Time, but not exactly the same. This works really well when you're looking for data sets, when you're looking for government resources, when you're looking for stock images or stock music, for example. just different ways of exploring search. Similarly, if you wanted to find an older version of that website, maybe just like the last cached version of that, you can use cache colon in the URL. And then what that is actually going to do is show you the last version of the website that Google has cached in its system. If you want an older version of that site, say one going back 5 years or longer ago, there's a tool that's actually not a Google tool called the Wayback Machine, which is a very powerful way of finding older versions of a website. And it really is dependent on whether or not that site has been indexed or not. Not every website in the world will be there, but you'd be really surprised about how many times you can find an older version of a site that perhaps was redacted or edited in some fashion. Good resource there. Similarly, it's not just URLs and websites online, it's also documents. So if you're looking for a data set, for example, a budget, if you will, file type :XLS, this will work for any file type. So PDF, PNG, CSV, and so on and so forth. You can kind of narrow down your search by file type as well. And you can also combine these various different searches also. So for example, if I just wanted to find on Twitter, this is something actually I learned from one of my trainees a couple weeks ago. She showed me this really cool link. She's actually a food reporter. She showed me how to do this, where you can search Twitter by going to site:/twitter.com. And then in URL, you're looking just within the URL of any Twitter link, the word lists. And then within these little brackets, she put Michelin starred. But this could be really any list that you might find on Twitter. So maybe you're looking for politicians within a region, or you're looking for folks, sports stars, or whatever that might be. You can kind of think a little bit how somebody might create a Twitter list and then search for it in this fashion. Similarly, you can do this on Instagram. So if you wanted to just find all the best mountain views, but don't want shots of people skiing or something like that, I can go to site:/Instagram.com/mountains, which is the keyword, and then -skiing, very similarly to car with the Jaguar example. And it's just going to give you examples of Instagram links of mountains without skiing related to that. You can also combine various different search modifiers to find just within a specific website a specific file. So if I'm looking within a government website, .gov, looking for examples that mention injuries, and I'm looking for a file type like a PDF, which is often the type of file format that they provide data sets in, I could do injuries site:/.gov file type :PDF. And it's going to reveal to me all PDFs, which you can see demarcated here by the brackets, of documents that somewhere within that document, the term injury show up. Now, there's a lot of other information that's available with advanced search. If you want to find a really quick and easy way to find all of these tips, if you go to google.com and then go down to the settings menu and go to where it says advanced search, it's actually going to pull up a whole cheat sheet of all of these, which are interactive. So you can use searches in different languages if you wanted. You can look and narrow down by region. So if you're just covering stuff in Canada, for example, you can look for just Canadian posts. You could look site or domain, when was it last updated, and so on. So again, this is just within Google search, down under the settings menu. Makes it super easy to find it under advanced search there. Now, just popping back over to my presentation, the next tool that I would really talk about here would be Google Scholar. So if you think about Google as the library, you can go into the library, you can ask the librarian a question, that's basically using your Google search bar, or you could go to a specific aisle or row of that library where just a specific type of content is contained in. And Google Scholar would be a good example of that. So Google Scholar, it's a list of scholarly articles, publications, and case law that you can search for using those same search refinements that we were just talking about. So for example, if I was covering something like voter redistricting or gerrymandering, for example, I could see what articles, what scholarly work has been published about that particular topic. You can also find relevant publications. So if I wanted to see who the foremost expert on a particular topic would be, I can search by publication. I can also search by author. And this is a really good way in a lot of instances of finding an expert to interview or to talk about a particular project that you might be interested in. You can refine by date. So if you wanted to see the most recent articles, you can do it that way. And if you are following on a computer, you can actually just search for it right now. If you go to scholar.google.com, type in voter redistricting, and scroll through a little bit, you'll get an idea for what type of articles are being published there. And you can even set yourself up with an alert, which will drop right into your inbox on an ongoing basis, so they don't have to keep on going back to Google Scholar over and over again. I actually have one of these set up for myself on adult online learning, as well as things like blockchain, artificial intelligence, and other topics that I'm really interested in being on kind of the very bleeding edge of. These researchers and these educators provide a lot of resources in that way. Now, another thing that you can do too is search for case law or patent law. So if you're covering like a technology beat, or if you're covering finance or something like that, having an idea of what's going on in the tech sector and seeing what patents and other information is being developed is a really good indicator to kind of what's going on within an industry. So again, something definitely to check out. Now, I'm going to move on to Google image search. Most of you have probably searched for an image online before. Images.google.com is where you can go and find images of a specific type that you're looking for. You can narrow that down by size, by color, by type, even usage rights. So if I went in and typed in Mount Rushmore, went up to where it says tools, it's going to drop down this other menu bar here for me, which allows me to search by size or color or type or time. So if I wanted to, for example, see if there were images of a particular event just around that particular date of that event, I can narrow it down that way, or get by usage rights. So is the image free to use or share commercially with modification and so on. A little caveat to this though, and I do get this question from time to time, Google does not own these images. These are images taken by other people. So again, we're in a digital world. Make sure that before you take somebody's photo that you found under the label for reuse with modification usage rights, that you've followed through to see, is that the original image? Was it perhaps uploaded again by somebody else who may have downloaded that from another resource and maybe changed the usage rights? There's a little due diligence required there, but I'm going to show you how to use reverse image search in order to do exactly that. So what is reverse image search? Well, if you go to images.google.com, you can also do this on a mobile device. If you're on a mobile device, you need to select the the desktop version of your browser. Chrome browser typically works best here, and you go to images.google.com. This should work just regularly, no problem on a desktop, but it'll pull up this little icon for you. You'll see the little camera icon. If you click on that, it's going to bring up a second list of options, which allows you to take a URL from an image that you've grabbed online. So wherever that particular image is stored, you can grab the URL. Or if you have it on your computer, as I often do, I'll take a photo of something, like maybe during a presentation, take that image with my phone and then share it via reverse image search to search to see, has that image shown up online in the past? Are there multiple versions of that? Are there other images related to it? And then you can use that to really kind of verify and fact check a piece of content. Now, the URL on this is a little wonky, but it's tinyurl.com/risbridge, BRIDGE. So if you want to follow along and actually do a little bit of a reverse image search on this, you can even just take a screenshot with your phone of this photo. And if I was in a room with you, I would actually ask the whole room and say, hey, who recognizes this photo? Does anybody know where this bridge is? And a bunch of people are going to say, oh, it's totally the San Francisco Bay Bridge. I know that bridge. Or as somebody in one of my last trainings, he said, oh, obviously it's the San Francisco Bay Bridge. And I said, obviously it's not. So let's do a quick reverse image search on that. And what you actually find is that this image is indexed in our system. It looks very similar to other images that were taken of it. And what you would find is that that's not the San Francisco Bay Bridge. It's actually the 25th of April Bridge, which is in Portugal, I believe. Now, there's a whole other technique around image verification that we'll talk a little bit later on about, but in general, what you're looking for are other contextual clues within the image that might indicate where it was located. So I would be looking at the horizon line, I'd be looking at the types of buildings in the background, the type of foliage and trees that are in the foreground, taking a look at smaller details of the bridge, like the columns and the way it was designed, and also the on and off ramps. And there's ways to use Google Maps and Google Earth, which we'll also talk about a little bit later on, which will again help you kind of geolocate where this particular photo photo is, so you can make sure that you know what you're talking about. Now, again, it also works for people. Now, it's not going to work too well for me, as I'm not particularly famous. If you did a quick search on an image of me, what you probably find is other images of bald men, which isn't really going to help you out that much. But this person seems pretty important. He's got about 5 lavalier microphones clipped to his shirt, so probably somebody to be paying attention to here. If I did a reverse image search of this person, what I would actually find is this is a South Bend mayor, Pete Buttigieg, which I hope I'm pronouncing his name right, which is potentially a presidential hopeful at some point. So, again, quick reverse image search, you'll see where else these images show up online. You see various different examples of this image from various different publications, and then you can click through to that to find out more about this particular person. Now, you can also use the same technology and the same process, I should say, to reverse image search news as it's happening. So in this case, there was an article about the Ariana Grande Manchester concert, which had some explosions that happened during it back, I think it was May of last year. A lot of photos were actually circulated around online during this particular event within seconds of the event actually happening. A lot of news publications actually picked up these images of Ariana Grande and people really worrying about whether or not she was hurt during the event and the concert. And as these photos show, it looks like she's bruised up and banged up and has like maybe some blood on her and things like that. Now, if you did a reverse image search of this particular photo, unfortunately, what you would actually find out is this came from Ariana Grande's Scream Queens, which is a television show. Now, obviously, this is relatively harmless. It's spreading misinformation and definitely like changing the narrative of that particular event. But I think that this technique is really, really good to be able to make sure that whatever content you're sharing, whether that's a photo or a video, is authentic and it's actually about the event and not about something else. And this is something that we see quite a bit around school shootings and shootings in the United States. Every time a shooting happens, the same 2 or 3 false reports are sent out of the shooter, which causes confusion and disinformation. It makes it really hard for people who are trying to find out accurate information about an event to get the information that they need. Now, I mentioned you could do this also with video, and the way you can really do this is a couple of ways. You can do a reverse image search of the thumbnail on YouTube that's been uploaded for a video and get a better idea for where that particular location is. You can do that just by right-clicking often on that thumbnail and going to where it says reverse image search, and that should pull up. Now, another tool that I'd talk about here is what's called Public Data Explorer. And Public Data Explorer is another one of those rows in the library. And what this allows you to do is take a look at massive amounts of public data sets from third-party data providers that we've partnered with to provide up-to-date, accurate data sets for folks to be able to navigate and use. Google Public Data Explorer really helps you find and interpret that data instead of having to look at a spreadsheet and go line by line. It actually gives you the opportunity to experiment with that spreadsheet in graphical form. You can monitor things like change over time. You can identify various different trends. And there's a lot of additional information that you can do with that. So if I wanted to search for something like a population of a particular region, if I just typed that right into Google search, it's going to give me a little one box here, which includes both the county that I searched for and other counties that are nearby that other people may have been searching for. And it gives me this option to do what is called explore more. Now, down below that, it's showing me that the sources include the United States Census Bureau, and it'll give me an opportunity to click through that. What I'm going to do is just pop out here and actually show you how this works in action. So if I go to google.com and I type in something like population, this is actually the town that I'm from, Carlisle, PA, not a huge bustling community here, and it's actually grown a little bit since I left back in the 90s. But it's showing me here that this is from the United States Census Bureau. And it's also showing me over here, Pennsylvania and Lancaster, other information that people might be interested in if they were doing a search for Carlisle. So again, back to this idea of how search works, this is a really useful way of getting an idea of what people are searching for and what other types of information you might want to include in your stories, but also gives you really good resources here. So if this is the United States Census Bureau, I'm just going to right click on this. And this is going to bring me right to where this particular data set is located. So it makes it super handy to find data sets without having to dig for hours on search to locate those. The other way of doing this would be go to where it says Explore More. Now, if I hit Explore More, it's going to bring me right to Public Data Explorer. And again, this is the US Census Bureau data I was just looking at. It shows me when it was last updated. It now gives me an opportunity to navigate across a handful of different regions. I'm just like literally like clicking on towns here, and I could even zoom into a more narrow search pattern here to a specific region. The United States, obviously, the population is huge here as comparison to these other cities. So I'm gonna like get rid of that, so I actually have something to look at here. And now I can narrow that down using these sliders down below to just a particular period in time. So I can see how there's like a big spike in population right after the 1940s in places throughout Massachusetts and in some cases in California. Now, I could also change the type of visualization that I'm looking at. So if perhaps I wanted an animated bar chart that shows me change over time, I can use that. I can also use scatter plot graphs or bubble charts or other types of information to help provide better clarity about that particular topic. Another thing that I can do with this too is I can really take a look at data sets and ask them questions. So this is an example right on the front page of Public Data Explorer, which is already setting up a kind of chunk of information here, showing me life expectancy down at the bottom, which goes from 1960 to 2015. And then it's also showing me fertility rate on the vertical axes here. And what it shows you is over time from the 1960s until 2015, in general, people are getting older, living longer, and having fewer and fewer babies. And you can actually see how some of these regions here, like these giant balls, are India and China and other regions like the United States and large populations like Japan, which is what you would probably expect for kind of population density. But if you kind of roll back time again and take a look at this one more time, and this is one of the interesting things about data, well, suddenly you get these anomalies here and here. And then further on in time, you get a couple more anomalies that pop out as well. So something is happening in the world in the 1990s that's causing fertility rate to drop. It's causing life expectancy to drop considerably. And those are in regions like Rwanda and Sierra Leone and other places where perhaps conflict or other environmental issues were being encountered, which would cause changes and fluctuations in population or in life expectancy or fertility rate. So again, this is just a spreadsheet that we're looking at, and this Data Explorer allows me to get into this in much more an easy way and visually animate it in a way that it can allow me to ask the right questions. Now, that's great for you for research, but it also helps you tell stories. So you can actually embed this directly within your article or share it on social media using any of these links. And I'm going to hand it off to our colleagues here to kind of take you through how this iframe embed would work within your own CMS system. But just to say that almost all of the tools that we're talking about today, you can do exactly this. You can visualize the content, you can grab a HTML embed code and drop that directly within your CMS. So I'll hand it over.
Thank you, Nick. That is just riveting information, seeing those little bubbles zoom around based on actual things that are happening in the world. That is very interesting. Just to kind of preface this a little bit by saying some of this data and these graphs, being able to embed them into your story as you're writing the story is extremely helpful. And we've seen the data associated with an article that has inline images, that has inline graphs and inline information. The engagement and the time spent on those pages by the end users is significantly higher, by 3 or 4 times more on an average basis. So it's very important to get that information, not just for writing the story, but also for showing that to your end users and for transparency, etc. So as Nick said, one of the things that we have in BLOX is the ability to embed those items into the story as you write them. And if you could show the next slide. It's really easy to do in BLOX. One thing that we want to encourage, though, is that even though you have the capability of just adding that directly into the article in some cases, we would actually recommend to do it as an HTML asset type and then actually embed that HTML asset into the story. So I'll show you how to do that really quickly here, if you can show the next slide. So this is an example of an article that theoretically I'm writing. And essentially, you go to your child assets, and then you go to more editorial, and you choose the HTML asset type. So you can show the next slide. What I'm doing here is embedding the information that Nick showed on the previous slide, where you click on embed, you get the embed code, and this will work for any kind of embeds from around the internet that you're allowed to add into your site. You use the HTML asset, you click on the embed code, you add the code here. In this particular case, I've looked at the iframe width, and I've chosen to make that 100% just so that it's more responsive to the site. As you know, BLOX by default uses responsive design. So there might be some cases where you want to hard code something at 300 pixels, etc. In this case, 100% looked great, so I changed that one item within the embed code. Go to the next page. Then at the top, you can fill out your title, your description, if you want to add in the byline, where this particular item came from, or if it was done by a specific researcher, the byline can go there. On the next slide. And then for the preview area, you can actually add in a preview of the article, or like a screenshot of the graph or something like that, just to give people a tease of what that graph shows. Then essentially what you do is you take that HTML asset that is now a child on your article, you drag it inline, and it's literally just a drag and drop option from the child asset area into your article. Obviously the placement matters, so you can add this into the, right above the paragraph where you're talking about world fertility rates, etc. In this particular case, you can actually double click on that gray area that's showing the inline asset and choose how it looks on your site. And there's several different options using our article designer tools, and you can choose to kind of play that in line. You can have a teaser to it, other things. Can you show the next slide? In this case, I've chosen in my example article to display, or I call it just play out the HTML, where we essentially just put the embed code directly into your article. And then this will add that, literally will add the interactive map inside of the article, and users can, go through the slide, they can click on the individual countries, they can kind of do the playing back and forth of the timeline like Nick was just doing inside of your article, which is, I think, really great. If you can show the next slide. Another thing that's really important about using the HTML asset, instead of adding it directly into the story itself, and I know that this is like one extra step, but adding it as an HTML asset means that the content management system, that your BLOX system, knows that that is a separate entity from your story, and we're able to say, all right, when we show this in alternate platforms like the accelerated mobile pages or AMP system, that we're able to create a link to that graphic instead of showing it inline where it might not be AMP compliant. And if you're including code from a website that doesn't have AMP compliant code, it will actually prevent that article from going into the AMP system, and it won't be displayed in the Google search results. So it's the safest thing to use the HTML asset, so that way we're able to make the most optimized code when you're viewing that in the AMP product. And then the next slide. And then this is just a really quick example of, with the article designer tools, instead of playing this fully inline as an interactive inline graph, I actually just did a kind of teaser to it, and I just changed to show a summary mode instead of an HTML mode using the article designer tools, and then this way I'm able to link off to it instead. So this would be really useful if, let's say I had 6 graphs that I wanted to embed into my story, and maybe it's videos or something like that, and at some point it might get to be too much and you just want to have a nice link going off elsewhere so you're not kind of maybe bogging down the page. And in that case, you might want to have, maybe the top one has a full played out interactive graphic, but then there's a couple that just have teasers, and then you also have the mode of having just a headline, and you can link to the headline in there. So there's a lot of different options available here, but I just really wanted to recommend to use that HTML asset so that the CMS can do the best we can with that information and make it work in the most places. And I think that's it, Nick. Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, my pleasure. That's super interesting. Yeah, and as far as like engagement goes, I've heard this mirrored time and time again. As far as like the data really does show that engagement increases exponentially if you have something for people to engage with, especially if you can make that relevant to them. So I think maps are a really great resource for this. Data, charts. The idea with all of this is you want to make it easier for people to understand the story, not more complicated. So there's whole techniques around this that you could think about. And in fact, we've got a partnership. If you go to Google News Initiative's website or g.co/news training, you'll see a MOOC that we've developed with the Knight Center in Austin, Texas, on data journalism for beginners. And it's a relatively kind of beginner level course, but I think it's a really good way of getting started. We're about 2 weeks into that course, so there's still plenty of time to catch up. I actually plan to dive into that myself this weekend and get caught up on everything I didn't do over the last 2 weeks. So definitely check that out. Another thing that we would be talking about in terms of possible things to embed or use to help tell your stories would be Google Trends. Now, I often get the question of how do I make sure that my content shows up more highly on Google News or on Google Search? A big part of that question isn't so much optimizing your site for the web, while that is a whole technique, and there's a website called Google Webmaster Central, which will actually walk you through all the best practices for that. A lot of that also is just writing the right headlines. So if you think about how Google search works, what you're really thinking about is how humans work. And the idea here is, what are the search terms or queries or words or phrases that people are typing into the search bar in order to find a particular piece of information, hopefully the piece of information that I've actually written my story on. Google Trends is a great way of putting your finger on the pulse of what people are searching for at any given moment. And it actually does a lot of different things. So you could find out latest stories and insights, which are curated content that we put up at the top of our search Google Trends account, so that if there is breaking news happening or if there's a kind of an evergreen story, we create little visualizations and other types of data that we've aggregated that we have found to be interesting, that we thought that news organizations might find interesting as well. There's also the recently trending page, which gives you an up-to-the-minute listing of algorithmically trending stories, and that's constantly updated. There's an explore search term or topics feature, which allows you to copy up to or compare up to 20 plus topics across time, across geography, and across topic on pretty much anything that you're looking for. And there's a lot of really powerful ways of using this. You know, in the last election, you know, again, with the midterms coming up, this could be really useful to take a look at search interest of various different search terms minute by minute during a political debate, for example. So in this case, this is actually looking at day by day relative search volume for people voting, searching vote Clinton or vote Trump right around election day. And you can kind of see towards the tail end of this graph on the right-hand side how there was a sudden split or rise in searches for vote Trump versus vote Clinton. Now, here's another example, again, from the elections of last year, using Google data to see how people are responding in real time to an event. This is literally looking minute by minute during a political debate and seeing how various different people see something that happens in the real world or on television, and then they go online and search for more information. And then you can actually measure minute by minute and see what different things people were talking about during that particular debate, you know, whether that be Trump's stakes or Cruz's tax plan or John Cage's talk on foreign policy, issues around Trump University. And you can see these like little drum beats here that occurred and compare over time who was searching for who more. And it looks like on this particular one, way more people were searching for Trump than anybody else. Now, this isn't necessarily to say that Google Trends is a predictive tool that could necessarily predict who's going to win in an election, but it definitely does point to things that are happening in the real world and how people are interested in them. So, for example, in Brazil, taking a look at top questions, the top 5 questions on Dilma Rousseff. This is one of those featured insights that we provide at the top of our page on Google Trends. And this was used by a few different organizations to help tell the story about what's going on in Brazil around Dilma Rousseff. And again, CNN used this, 5 questions you asked and we answered. Now, they didn't put a graph in there, they didn't put a visualization, but they did base their story off of the questions that were being asked right within Google search. So again, a really powerful way to figure out what stories people are interested in and what you might want to be working on. Now, there's other tools to take and visualize Google Trends data. And if you're not a graphic designer or a data visualizer, that's fine. We've actually created tools that makes it super easy to do some pretty elegant visualizations, like this one called tilograms, which allows you to make and export things that are called cartograms, which is just a visualization geographically of proportional search interest. So what we're looking at here is after a variety of different shootings, after Charleston, the one in Virginia, another one in Oregon, and then taking a look overall of searches that happened throughout all of 2015, and taking a look at how various different regions were searching for searches like gun control and gun shop, and how over time the sentiment and the kind of tenor of how people were searching changed pretty dramatically. And it's really, really interesting to kind of see region by region, you know, kind of who is holding out and searching more for topics like gun shop. I was actually born in Kentucky, so I have a warm spot in my heart for that state, but very interesting to see their search traffic over time, where pretty much the entire rest of the region started searching for gun control. Similarly, here is another way of taking a look. You can't necessarily divine intent from Google search traffic because you don't necessarily know why somebody's going online and searching for a particular topic, but looking at adjacent words and phrases that people are searching for in terms of a particular topic, like this one around gay marriage. This is looking at three different kind of buckets: negative, neutral, or positive. So for example, examples of stop gay marriage would be kind of bucketed more into the negative category. Neutral would be looking at how many states allow gay marriage. Positive might be something like why gay marriage should be legalized. And you can see change over time how our country's views, or at least how they're searching for these views online, have changed pretty dramatically. There's other tools, and by the way, there's tutorials on our website that'll walk you through how to use all of these, and they're really relatively simple to take advantage of. Another one, Data GIF Maker or GIF Maker, depending on how you say it. You can actually drop in two different terms, adjust it to view either percentages or qualified kind of ranges, and then it'll just animate back and forth, kind of a little comparison here. And this is super basic. You know, it could be something as easy as like peanut butter and jelly, or like different politicians, or if you wanted to do a survey of, you know, people's favorite superhero, you know, you could do things like that, and drop it in here, and it creates just like this really basic graphic. It's pretty simple. You drop in your names, you drop in the values, you put a little note into there as to where the data came from, and within a few minutes it generates this GIF, which then you can embed as an iframe. Flourish is another tool that we've done some work with in conjunction with Flourish Studios. This company called Kiln in London has been working on this with us. And these are free for newsrooms. There are a whole list of various different visualizations that you can use, including scatter plot graphs and line and bar charts. There's maps of the US there. There's photo sliders that you can use. There's a ton of different information that you can take advantage of. Really, the idea here is just to make it easy as possible for people to visualize information, regardless of their level of skill with graphic design. We also have obviously lessons on the site about that. And then on our GitHub page, there's two other resources that I would take a look at in terms of finding data to use. Our GitHub page would be one, github.com/Google Trends. This provides a running list of all the data visualizations, as well as data sets that we provide on all of the various different topics. And those are archived there on Google, on the GitHub page, and made available for you to download and use as you need. Kaggle would be another one. We recently acquired Kaggle. It's a company that's pretty well known for their competitions and boot camps. They also have an amazing list of data sets on a wide range of topics, including some really interesting stuff, particularly on dating. On dating sites. So there's a bunch of interesting data to dive in there. I kind of look at Kaggle as a Wikipedia for data sets. A lot of these are vetted and verified by the community. You'll want to do your own due diligence to make sure that that data is accurate, but it at least gives you a place to start. Now, I mentioned also Election Data Bot, and this is another tool that I think will come in handy either if you're voting coming up. I need to vote within the next couple days here in Colorado, and I've actually used Election Data Bot to compare various different candidates by state or by race, whether it's Democratic or Republican, and then get an idea for example, campaign finance filings. What other Google search trends data is popping up around there? Vote activity. What have they voted on? What press releases have been sent out? There's a ton of additional information on there that can be used in your stories as well. So again, Election Data Bot provides a lot of different information. I also forgot to mention it includes things like polls, congressional votes, and the other things that I mentioned. Project.propublica.org/election data bot, or just search on Google for Election Data Bot and it'll pop up. We also have a lesson on our website that goes into this in much more detail. Now I'm going to pivot off now to mapping, and we're going to try to burn through a lot of this stuff. We'll see how far we get. I know we're running a little short on time, and there's actually more content in here than we have time to present it. So we'll see how far we get. Again, I'll provide all the resources afterwards. So if you're interested in learning more about any of these topics, there's a lot of ways to do that. When you're talking about Google Maps and Earth, what you're really talking about are about a half a dozen different products. And we all probably know Google Maps. You search for a particular location. In this case, I'm looking for the Pointer Institute, which is where we just did a bunch of training with the Report for America folks. I could search for Pointer Institute. It's going to show me on the map, drop a pin there, and help me navigate around. Or if I was looking for Las Vegas, for example. If I was looking for the Paris on Las Vegas specifically, I could search between a few different views. This is the map view that you're probably familiar with. You can switch to satellite view. You can also go into a 45-degree angle view of this and navigate in 3D space around this particular place. I do this quite a bit for location scouting for photos or for really cool camping spots. Which I spend a lot of my time doing when I'm not on the road. I also use this quite a bit to find, where my hotel is in proximity to a location that I'm trying to go to, or where the good coffee shops are in town. There's also a tool built in within this that we're seeing on the bottom right-hand corner here, which is historical street view imagery. And we're going to show you some examples of that in a minute. But the idea behind historical street view imagery is it gives you an ongoing list of examples of street view imagery that we've captured throughout time. And this is a direct request that we got from various different newsrooms who wanted to use older versions of street view imagery, but every time we updated the new street view imagery, it would get rid of the old imagery. So we've created an opportunity for you to zoom down to a location using the little peg man, go to historical street view imagery, and take advantage of that imagery back in time. Now, all of this imagery is embeddable right within your pieces, and you can create, in a lot of ways, various different interactives. So if you embedded this directly in your piece, this gives people the ability to navigate around inside this map. It's interactive, it's engaging. You can also do before and after a comparison. So I think NBC has done a really good job of showing before and after imagery of the fires that happened in Northern California earlier last year. Now, this little slider that they have here it's what's called a JSON slider. It's juxtapose.js. It's available for free, and it was provided by the Knight Foundation, I believe. And what it allows you to do is do this little kind of back and forth slide to show you the street view imagery on the left-hand side and photography that's been captured on the right-hand side of that scene. So you can really get an idea for the scope and scale of this particular event. Now, beyond maps, just dropping a single pin on the map or street view, if you have multiple pins that you want to drop or multiple locations that you want to highlight, that's when you start looking at something like Google My Maps. And this is a really good example from La Nation, who took the map and drew out the area that's been affected by flood inundation within a particular region. They also highlighted road closures. They highlighted where there was rescue areas and other regions that were affected here. This map probably took all of about 10 minutes to create. That shape was actually probably hand-drawn using the tools that are built in with Google My Maps. And then there's pins that have been dropped on here probably manually, one at a time, but you could just as easily upload a spreadsheet of information as well. And this is basically what Vice did. They had a spreadsheet of all of the time code mentions of locations throughout the Baltimore region during the Serial podcast. If you haven't listened to the Serial podcast, I highly recommend checking it out. It's very binge-worthy. I listened to the very vast majority of that on a road trip to Utah one time with my wife and literally could not turn off the radio. It was amazing. Particularly interesting for me, and I don't know if my mouse actually shows here, but like right under the 122 highway here around the big cluster up above Ellicott City is actually where I used to live. So interestingly enough, this story took place right around the same time that I lived in that area. I had nothing to do with this particular story. Let's just be clear about that. But it's very interesting to me seeing this visualized on a map. This whole story suddenly took on a very much more personal bend to it, where before it was just kind of something, oh, it's interesting, it happened in Baltimore. Well, actually, it happened right in my backyard. So very, very interesting to see that visualized on a map. And it's similar to what BBC has done here. And this is user-generated content. They had a shout out on Facebook and on social media. Send in your content, send in your amazing photos of weather throughout the UK. Obviously, they talk quite a bit about weather over there. And then they map that out using that spreadsheet. And in this case, they use little indicators to indicate the difference between rain and sun and thunderstorms. But you could also link off to the original Facebook posts and the original links to give a little love back to the community there. And obviously you can embed this directly within your article or your piece using the iframe embeds. Now, similarly, Google My Maps is available right within Google Drive. So if you have a G Suite account or a Google account, you can access this via Google Drive, and it behaves very much like a document or another resource that you might be working on, which is great because this can be done collaboratively. So if you have multiple people contributing to a story or contributing to a map, you can give them edit privileges. You can share it as if you would a spreadsheet or a document. It's also available on mobile too, and I use this quite a bit when I'm traveling to take a look at various different regions. Often I'm taking photographs all over the place in 360 photos, and I like to have an ongoing list of where all of those things are. But this could just as easily be like World Cup stadiums or best 20 bike cities, where all the good coffee shops are, or if you wanted to create a little locator map for all the off dog leash areas within your neighborhood. I've even seen some really good ones here in Denver. The Denver Post, part of Digital First Media, created a really good holiday map, which shows you where all the Christmas lights are within a particular region. I've also seen some good ones in Canada where they did where all the swap meets and yard sales were, and other information that's really timely, but navigation would be really useful for folks. And the great thing about this is if somebody pulls this map up on their mobile device and they click on one of these links, it's automatically going to pull them right into Google Maps and give them those kind of step-by-step directions, which is what I use when I go to the holiday lights every Christmas, using that holiday lights map that the Denver Post creates. Now, we have a training module on our website that goes into this as well. And just a quick note, most of these training modules are about 10 minutes or less long. So you can really kind of do this on a bite-sized way and pepper these into your articles as you go without having to feel like overwhelmed because there's just too much information. Google Earth Pro would be another way of approaching this. So again, all news happens someplace. Showing that visual context, especially with 3D, is really helpful. We also have, very similar to the historical street view imagery, we have historical satellite imagery. So you can go back to 2017 and see what Las Vegas looked like, or take a look at it back in 2008, and you can see there's obviously been a few changes there. When you go back to 2002, looking even different, back to 1965 perhaps, or maybe even back to 1950. Now, obviously, things have changed quite a bit within that region. It's hard to visualize that without showing progressive imagery over time. You can do this also on a much smaller scale. This is a look at the Pyeongchang Olympic Stadium being built as the ramp up to the most recent elections was occurring. And you can kind of see how a lot of the farm area of this particular region was taken up by the stadium and the surrounding areas. Again, here's some more before and after imagery. This is taking a look at satellite imagery before on the left-hand side using Google Earth imagery. On the right-hand side, this is imagery taken from a drone or a helicopter showing the devastation after those California wildfires. This one was actually done by the New York Times, but this could be really done by anybody. The Washington Post did a similar thing here with 3D imagery where they photoshopped out all of the material that they actually weren't interested in and created an interactive graphic using that 3D imagery pulled right from Google Earth. And again, it doesn't have to be the Washington Post or the New York Times. Like any small newsroom can do this just as easily. And it takes about 10 or 20 minutes to get up to speed with that. I'm going to try to play this video. I don't know
the
that
deadliest mass shooting in modern American history. 59 people are dead. More than 5.
Trying to look for the volume button. Hold on one second. Let me adjust this. I'm going to mute that, and then I'm going to play it. I just wanted to show you the visuals of this. But basically what we're looking at here is Aaron Burnett taking a look at the animation of the Mandalay Bay shooting in Las Vegas. And again, this animation took all about maybe 5 or 10 minutes. It might be a little choppy on your screen because we're screen sharing here, but this is a really smooth, quick animation which helps show the proximity of this particular event in relationship to where the rest of the story took place. And again, this is really hard to get a visualization of this without being able to see, sorry, little technical difficulty there, without being able to see kind of like where things are in relationship to one another. 3D mapping can be a really powerful tool to help illustrate that. Here's another example. This is the Columbia Dispatch doing a similar one where they animated these various different stadiums. I'm not a particularly huge sports ball fan, but this is taking a look at all these various different stadiums as a lead up to, I think it was college football, if I'm not mistaken. And this is a pretty quick animation that they created. Maybe it took about 15 or 20 minutes to build this one out, but it uses that really common googly swoop down from space that you've probably seen in many different locations before. Zooms around a particular stadium. I'm just kind of skipping ahead here because the animation is relatively long, but in some cases, this can really provide a lot of good context for a story and really give you an inside view of this particular location in a way that you wouldn't be able to see otherwise. That brings me to Google Earth Engine, which is another tool related to Google Earth. This is really good for web experiences, and really what Google Earth Engine time-lapse is it's a time-lapse view of the entire world, scrubbed of any clouds or any anomalies or other stuff that you wouldn't want in your animation. And it allows you to do some really cool stuff. So I can actually take a look over time in the Las Vegas region, how urbanization and how development has really changed the landscape of this region. And in some cases, actually, it looks like it's affecting the water table of the nearby reservoir. Again, showing over time, lakes drying up in Lake Irma, for example, between 1984 and 2012, deforestation in the Brazilian Amazon, or glacier retreat in the upper northern regions. So there's a lot of different ways of visualizing change over time. And I think this, again, when a lot of this stuff happens on geological scale or geological time, it's really hard to get a picture of really what's going on when someone says, oh, the forest is being deforested. Well, it's being reduced in number of trees. It's really hard to kind of visualize that without showing somebody on a map what that looks like. And I think that Google Earth Engine time-lapse does a fantastic job of showing that to you. If you've ever done any Flash-based animation from back in the early 2000s, this will look really familiar to you. It's basically just capturing a couple screenshots, change the period in time, and then you got a collection of those, which then turns into a movie. You can change the video size, the playback speed. You can even set it to autoplay and embed that right within your piece. Like the Sydney Morning Herald did here, showing changes in urbanization and urban sprawl within the Sydney region. Again, Earth Engine time-lapse, you can get to that by going to bit.ly/timelapse editor. We have a training module on our website that'll walk you through that as well. But this is super basic and easy to use. If you could follow directions on a recipe, you can probably follow the directions on this and crank out a really cool animation that'll help flesh out your story. Now, I often get the question too of how do I make sure that I'm using this content appropriately? What do I need to think about in terms of staying up to date with any new imagery? G.co/earth/media alerts is an alert system that you can sign up for. Anytime breaking news happens that's affecting a large area, like a wildfire, an earthquake, or a hurricane, we provide satellite imagery as well as other resources and animations for newsrooms to use as they want. You can get to that by going to g.co/earth/media alerts. Similarly, you can go to google.com/permissions to find out how to use this content in your work. So we want you to use our maps and we want you to use our imagery. We just want to make sure that you're appropriately attributing the third-party data providers that we share content with. And you can get to google.com/permissions, and all of the questions that you might have as far as how to utilize those maps will be there for your reference. Now, we're just scratching the surface of mapping and training. We have a ton of additional resources on our own website, but also on this bit.ly/geomedia lab. This is like an advanced master's levels course on all the various different topics that you might be interested in terms of mapping. So definitely worth checking that out. I mentioned before, g.co/news training is our website where you'll find courses and lessons on all of the various different topics that we talked about today. I also mentioned the spj.org/Google site where you can sign up for free training on demand wherever you're at. So if you're interested in getting training in person, I definitely recommend checking out these folks. I have trained them all myself, and they're a really sharp group of folks, and we're really excited to be partnering with them again this year. So spj.org/Google. One other resource that I would point out, we just started to scratch the surface a little bit with verification and fact checking and reverse image search of images. Firstdraftnews.org would be one that I would check out. We have a really great partnership with them. They're part of the Harvard Kennedy School Shorenstein Center, and we have worked with them to build best practices, curricula, and other information that covers what they call information disorders. So again, not fake news, but misinformation, disinformation, propaganda and just bad reporting. And also provide a checklist to think about. So if you find a piece of content on social media or elsewhere, before you share that, before you include that into your piece, it gives you a bit of a checklist to think about. And some basic questions on that are, do you know the original source of that resource? Do you know that that is the original link? Do you know when it was posted? Do you know what the other content is and within that particular photo? And there's a whole list of other techniques that you could do to verify that content. But reverse image search and Google Maps and Google Street View imagery are a big part of their workflow. So definitely worth checking that out. firstdraftnews.org. Let's take a look. What can we cover in a couple minutes here? Well, I think, first of all, I would definitely take some time and look through the Google News Initiative Training Center. There's a lot of additional training material here, which we didn't even get a chance to scratch the surface of. What we went through was the fundamentals section, which is down here at the bottom. There's actually a PDF download of the entire course, which has a few different topics that we didn't get a chance to cover. And it also gives you a list of all the various different tools that are in here. So advanced search, image search, trends, alerts. Google News Archive is actually another really good one that we didn't get a chance to touch on. So if you wanted to take a look at older versions of newspapers, this gives you a historical archive of all of the various different papers that Google has scanned. And it goes from 2003 until the present. You can actually find stories before 2003 as well if you go to site:google.com/newspapers, and it's going to find a bunch of older references of like Scantron documents. And then you can go from there and actually look at, if you want to look under the news archive section down here as another way of getting to it. So that would be one thing that I might take a look at. Beyond that, there's a lot of information on Street View, on YouTube and Google Translate, which we didn't get a chance to touch on. And then there's a quiz down here at the bottom. So take some time, go through this. The whole thing, it says 124 minutes, but that's a lie. It only takes about maybe 60 or 70 minutes total to get through it. This will give you a super strong grounding on all the various different training material that you would want to know in terms of fundamentals. And then from there, what I would do is I would check out a couple other ones. So verification, I think this is going to become more and more useful for journalists, is like just common practice. We covered a little bit of this around image verification, reverse image search. There's a whole section on Chrome plugins and extensions, how to use Google Earth and other verification tools to narrow down and fact check a piece of content. Really worth taking some time to take a look at that. Another one that I would really highlight too would be safety and security. So we do some surveys from time to time, and I actually get some pretty good information about the average journalist and how many of them are using a complex password, how many of them are using the same password for multiple websites, who has two-factor authentication set up or two-step verification set up. And sadly, very, very few journalists are actually taking these very basic steps to make sure that they are safe online, their data is safe online, and their sources are safe online. So I would recommend checking out these basic ones. Password alert, two-step verification are two that I would definitely recommend. We have a whole site, let's see what it's called. It's called Protect Your Election with Google. This is really kind of catered more towards elections, but this really, I think, covers just about any topic in terms of things that you should be thinking about. If you're a journalist, you are by nature more at risk for hacking and phishing attempts than most people. We have tools available to help prevent some of that stuff from happening. So Advanced Protection Program is a really good way of protecting your accounts online. I actually have it on my own account. It makes it very, very hard for somebody to phish for my passwords. And even if they had it, they would still need the hardware key that I have in my hand to access my account from an unauthorized computer. It also protects you through a handful of other options. So it makes it a little bit more difficult for third-party apps to access sensitive data. It also does a little bit more high-level scrutiny of documents as you're sharing them via Gmail or Google Drive. And there's a lot more information in here, including Password Alert, which I mentioned earlier, and Smart Lock, which is a password saver that's built into Google Chrome. And there's this other tool called securityplanner.org, which, if nothing else, take some time to go through this. This is actually provided by a group called the Citizen Lab, and it walks you step by step through what you should be thinking about in terms of protecting yourself or your information online. So for example, if I have social media accounts that I wanted to make sure that I was protecting, or on my Android account, or maybe also my email, it'll walk you through the things to be thinking about here. So if I'm particularly worried about, maybe downloading viruses and malware, and maybe interested in better communications and privacy. It'll give me some options here to think about that. If I want to know like how governments are maybe accessing my data, or maybe I'm dealing with an urgent digital security issue, like I've like literally been hacked, or I think that I might have been. It'll actually walk you through some things to think about and other options that you can take advantage of, like encrypted chat apps, and then other things you might want to be thinking about in terms of where to get your resources, including like how to track or protect a lost or stolen phone. So it provides a lot of really good resources and things to think about. Just as an anecdotal story, it wasn't that long ago that my mom and dad actually were hacked. Or they think that they were hacked. And the reason I know that is that we, all three of us, my mom, my dad, and myself, all got like the same mysterious phone message, essentially saying that if my mother didn't call soon, they were going to be taken to court and a judgment was going to be sent against them. Now, they've done nothing wrong that would require that to happen. And the fact that all three of us got the phone call at the same time really makes it a very curious thing. Now, I also had a couple phishing attacks that happened within close proximity to that, and my dad also had a piece of malware downloaded onto his computer. Now, are these things related? It's unknown, but it did give me enough pause to go through, make sure that I was protecting my accounts, sign up for password alert, and sign up for two-step verification and advanced protection to make sure that even if I wasn't the weakest link, somebody along the line there may have been, and at least I was protecting my information from whoever was trying to access our accounts. So we'll definitely check that out also. And I think that's kind of it. I think I would love your feedback. I'd love you guys to reach out and let us know how we can be of more service to you. I'm just going to flash up my contact information here again that we had up here at the top. newslabsupport@google.com. Again, I'm on social media @NickDigital, and we have a whole host of other resources available. Stay in touch. Let us know how we can help. If you're working on a project and you're really excited or just had questions about what you're working on, or if you'd like us to promote or share some of the really good work that you've done with Google tools, reach out to us, newslabsupport@google.com, and then my social media account @NickDigital.
And I just wanted to follow up. So first off, just thanks so much, Nicholas. This was really awesome. I consider myself, especially for something that I use every day, like Google search, to be an expert, and several of those things I actually did not know until I took your webinar. So this is really awesome. The reverse image search, that is so important for journalism. A source sends you a picture of the car crash. If it's something that was on social media or something someone emailed you, it's so hard to know for sure that that was really the car crash, and that's obviously something that really helps with journalism and responsibility. So that's really great. I just wanted to say very quickly a couple of things. Just as we're getting a couple of questions about more generic questions like things like SEO or ways that you can help kind of promote your site within Google, or ways that you can like rich snippets and schema.org and stuff like that. I just wanted to mention briefly that that's one of the things that we're doing with our Google partnership right now, that we are looking and working very closely with different teams within the Google organization to help with things like the schema and with things like SEO, and trying to change things within our CMS itself to make it very easy to for those things to happen automatically behind the scenes. Things like our news map integration and that and so forth. And so we're working very closely with the Google team on that, and they give us kind of recommendations and review how our software works, and so that we're able to help out in terms of those things. And I think, do you want to add something to that, Nicholas?
Yeah, I just pulled up a couple other resources too. So if folks are interested in learning more about basic questions like SEO, how to make sure that your content's showing up good on Google Search and Google News, there's a lot of really good resources right here on google.com/webmasters. And there's a lot of good information also on the Webmasters forum. So if you go down here, it says Help Forum. Most of these questions have already been asked a billion times before. Unfortunately, we have some limitations on how much we can really instruct on in terms of SEO. But the folks on the Webmaster Central forum can actually provide a lot more insights on that. So if you ever just get like a general question and can't reach out to somebody immediately at Google, check this resource first, Webmaster Central forum, and then also google.com/webmasters to give you kind of a broader understanding of how this stuff works. And then the other thing would just be schema.org. So there's a lot of information as well as documentation on how schema works. There's a lot of other stuff like the fact check tag, like the local tag that might be relevant for folks that might be using your platforms. But again, feel free to reach out if you have any other questions and we can kind of route you in the right direction.
Yeah, that's awesome. We at Town News are really interested in the schema stuff and have found that just things like adding schema properties within some of our specific blocks that show social media, or our blocks that show the publisher contact information, and those things automatically turn into rich cards in the search results. And that's something that we can do as the content management partner, that without any work on the organization, the publications side, that those things automatically transform into data that Google can access and do interesting things with. So we love those types of things at Town News here. And I did want to say, I don't know if Terry, if you're going to talk about this at all, but one thing that we will do after this is send out a survey to the participants of this webinar, just to kind of find out how useful this was to you. I know it was useful to me. How useful this was. What of those other things that Nick mentioned towards the end there are you interested in? What else can we provide you in terms of this relationship and in terms of more follow-up webinars? Was this a good time? Was it too short, too long? What you think about this, and we would love to be able to, again, help out our partners and help out local journalism with these type of initiatives.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, just if anybody's ever interested in getting another webinar signed up, feel free to reach out. Let us know how we can help. These are really great ways for us to reach large numbers of people. And again, just really excited to work with you. And if there's any questions that you have, I'm here to help.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for attending, and we will see you next time.